Welcome, everyone, to Easy History Podcast.
Uh-huh.
Today, we're going to try and tackle a really big one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany.
Okay.
I know. You're probably thinking, ugh, not this again. Didn't we learn all about this in school?
Right.
But this is going to be different.
Okay.
This is going to be a deep dive.
All right.
Like, really trying to understand, like, the specific circumstances that allowed, something as radical as Nazism to take root, and gain power.
You know what's really interesting about this is that it wasn't just like, boom, overnight they took over.
Yeah.
It's more like this chain reaction, It starts really with the aftermath of World War I.
Okay.
All of Europe is in chaos.
Right.
But Germany was hit particularly hard.
Really bad.
Oh, they had like these crippling war reparations.
Oh, wow.
Their economy was in free fall.
Oh, wow.
They had hyperinflation, which we'll talk about, and like just this psychological blow of defeat.
Yeah.
All of this just created the perfect breeding ground for resentment.
Resentment and what?
Instability.
Instability.
Yeah.
Okay, so, paint a picture for me of Germany right after the war. Like, what's going on?
All right, so imagine all these soldiers, they're coming home, and so many of them, they're deeply traumatized by what they've just seen and what they've experienced.
Yeah.
It's not easy to just flip a switch and go back to civilian life, after years of combat.
Right.
Many of them really struggled to find their place in a society that had, during that time, changed so drastically.
Yeah, I can't even imagine.
And this is where you see this concept of combatant mentality start to rise.
Enough bad mentality.
Yeah, these soldiers, they were so used to this rigid hierarchy, right?
Wow.
And this constant threat of death. And then to reintegrate back into a more, peaceful, democratic society.
Right.
It was a jarring shift for so many.
It makes sense.
And the thing is, it wasn't just individuals trying to cope with this. They started forming veteran associations like the Freikorps.
I've heard of those.
Yeah, and these groups, they often became like hotbeds for nationalist sentiment.
So you've got, all these groups of disillusioned men who are battle-hardened, probably still armed.
Right.
And they just feel like no one cares what they went through.
Exactly. And on top of that, the German economy, it's imploding.
What do you mean?
We're talking hyperinflation so bad that money was practically worthless.
Wow.
People lost everything, like their entire savings overnight.
Oh, my gosh.
Just to buy, basic things. The cost skyrocketed. You can imagine the desperation, the anger.
Yeah, for sure.
And this economic turmoil, it led to these deep, deep social divisions.
Like what?
Well, there were some people who actually profited from this inflation, certain industrialists,
Oh, wow.
speculators, and they were seen as villains. So you had all this resentment towards them, coupled with the fact that you have this brand new, fragile democracy in place.
Right. The Weimar Republic.
Exactly. It was just so unstable.
Right.
And it created this perfect environment where, extremist ideas, they could take hold.
So far we've got, this powder keg of social unrest, right?
Mm-hmm.
Economic chaos and this political instability. And then you add in, people are freaking out about what happened in Russia.
Right. The Bolshevik Revolution.
Yeah, the Bolshevik Revolution. People are terrified that, communism is going to spread all over Europe.
Especially the ruling class, they were terrified.
Yeah, they were probably thinking they were next.
Exactly. And you have to see this fear in the context of, what else was happening across Europe at the time?
What do you mean?
You had all these socialist movements.
Oh, right.
Labor strikes, workers were demanding better conditions. They were inspired by what happened in Russia.
Yeah.
And that just fueled even more anxiety for those in power.
So it's like you said, a perfect storm.
Exactly.
Economic chaos, social unrest, political instability, and this threat of revolution.
All right.
And that's the world that the Weimar Republic was born into.
And let me tell you, right from the start, it was an uphill battle.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. They inherited a shattered nation. They were burdened by this thing called the Treaty of Versailles.
Oh, yeah.
Which most Germans, they saw it as a punishment.
A punishment, not like a peace agreement.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And speaking of that treaty, I think we need to dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, let's do it. Weren't the terms super harsh on Germany?
They were. I mean, they demanded these insane war reparations. It was crippling. They were already in a bad spot.
Right.
And not only that, but the treaty forced Germany to accept full blame for the war, which, again, fueled that resentment, that nationalism.
Yeah.
So many Germans, They felt betrayed by their own government for signing it.
Yeah, I bet.
So you've got this young republic trying to rebuild, right? They're carrying the weight of this treaty that nobody likes.
So much opposition.
Oh, tons. And the political landscape, it was fragmented.
What do you mean?
No single party could get a majority.
Oh, wow.
So what do you get?
What?
A bunch of weak coalition governments that just couldn't maintain any stability, let alone get anything done.
It sounds like a mess.
It was. And all of this, it created a vacuum.
A vacuum.
Yeah, an opportunity for these extremist groups
Oh, okay.
on both the left and the right
Right.
to exploit all these anxieties and frustrations.
So that's when Hitler and his party come into the picture.
Exactly.
The National Socialist German Workers' Party.
Or the Nazi Party as we know them.
Right. But initially they were just like this small fringe group.
One of many.
But there was something about Hitler.
Oh, yeah.
He had this way of like tapping into the anger and the resentment that was everywhere.
He did. He positioned himself as like the strong leader, the only one who could fix things.
Bring back Germany's glory.
Right. And his message, it resonated with certain people, you know, the ones who wanted to blame someone for their suffering.
Right.
He promised to like tear up that treaty, rebuild the military.
Get rid of Germany's enemies.
Exactly.
So this was all like the early stages, right?
Right.
Like the kindling.
Yeah, the kindling that would eventually become a huge fire.
Right. So what were the events, like the turning points that helped them go from, this fringe group to a real political force?
That's a great question, and that's exactly what we'll talk about next time. We'll explore the key events that let Hitler, really consolidate his power,
Okay.
leading to the downfall of the Weimar Republic
Oh, man.
and the rise of the Third Reich. So last time we left off, Germany was, well, let's just say, not in a good place.
Yeah, no kidding. Fragile democracy, a wrecked economy, and a society full of anxiety. It's kind of crazy that Hitler and the Nazi Party actually managed to make any headway in all that.
Well, that's what's so fascinating about this, isn't it? They managed to use all of that chaos to their advantage.
Right.
Hitler, you got to give him credit. He was a master of propaganda. He knew how to appeal to people's emotion.
Yeah, their fears, their anger.
Exactly. He offered simple solutions to problems that were, well, incredibly complex. And he had his scapegoats, of course.
Minorities.
Right. And he promised to bring Germany back to its former glory. It was a powerful message.
Yeah, and we talked about the economic crisis, the crazy hyperinflation,
Right.
and how many Germans felt betrayed by the Treaty of Versailles. Did all of that actually help the Nazi Party gain support?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Then you throw the Great Depression into the mix.
Oh, yeah, early 1930s.
And it hit Germany really hard.
Unemployment, businesses closing left and right.
People were desperate, and the Nazis, well, they took advantage of that.
Portray themselves as the only ones who could fix it.
Exactly. The saviors. But even with all of that, they still had a problem.
What do you mean?
They didn't have a majority in the Reichstag.
Oh, right, the German parliament.
So Hitler had to find a way around that whole democracy thing. He needed a way to grab power.
And that's where the Reichstag fire comes in.
February 1933, a turning point.
Big time.
You have the Reichstag building, symbol of German democracy, going up in flames.
Yeah.
And it just created this wave of fear and uncertainty.
A perfect opportunity.
Oh, yeah. The Nazis, they blamed the communists immediately.
Of course.
Said it was a plot to overthrow the government.
Like a classic, never let a crisis go to waste kind of thing.
Exactly. Hitler used the fire as an excuse, declared a state of emergency.
Suspended civil liberties, cracked down on his opponents.
Especially the communists, imagine it. The Reichstag burning, the government shouting about a communist conspiracy.
And the Nazis just waiting in the wings.
Saying they were the only ones who could restore order. Pretty scary stuff.
Absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
So did that give the Nazi Party the majority they needed?
Not quite, but they got close. In the March 1933 elections,
Held into this state of emergency.
they won 43.9% of the vote,
Largest party in the Reichstag.
but still not a majority.
So what happened? How did they finally get control?
Well, that's when things took a real dark turn. Hitler, now that he had some real power, he had the backing of some pretty influential conservatives,
Mm-hmm.
and he used that to push through something called the Enabling Act.
The Enabling Act. That doesn't sound good.
It wasn't. It was basically the end of the Weimar Republic.
Really?
It was a law that gave Hitler dictatorial powers. He
Seriously?
could bypass the Reichstag, make laws without them.
Wow. They basically voted themselves out of power.
Pretty much.
No.
The Nazis and their allies, they had the votes. The remaining opposition, mostly the Social Democrats, they were either too scared to speak up or they got arrested.
It's amazing how fast a democracy can collapse.
It is, isn't it? And it shows that democracy is fragile. You have to protect it.
Absolutely. So once Hitler had the Enabling Act, what did he do?
He didn't waste any time. Consolidated his power, got rid of the opposition.
Banned all other political parties.
Crushed any resistance. The Nazi Party, after all these years of plotting and scheming, they finally got what they wanted.
Total control. Germany was now a one-party state, and Hitler was in charge.
Exactly. The Enabling Act, the opposition silenced, Hitler was a dictator.
Yeah.
And now he was ready to put his plan into action.
His plan based on racial purity, expanding Germany's territory.
And getting rid of anyone he saw as an enemy, it was a dark time.
It really was. We've talked about how the Nazi Party got to this point, but what about the people?
Right.
What happened to those who disagreed with them? Those who didn't want to be part of this new Germany?
That's an important question, and it's something we're going to look at next time. We'll explore those stories of resistance.
Okay.
How people fought back, even though it was incredibly dangerous. We'll see how Hitler, once he had control of Germany, he turned his attention to the rest of the world.
And that's how World War II started.
That's where it all leads.
So we've been talking about the Nazis' rise, and it's easy to get caught up in the politics and everything.
Right.
But we can't forget about the people.
You're absolutely right. I mean, the rise of the Nazis and, well, everything that came after,
Yeah.
it had a devastating effect on so many people. Millions.
So as we move forward here, I really want to hear about those who resisted. Like, were there people who actually stood up to Hitler?
You know, even with all the danger and the Nazis, they were brutal in shutting down anyone who disagreed with them.
Yeah.
There were these pockets of resistance
Yeah.
all over Germany and beyond.
Wow.
Some of it was small, like individuals.
Boy.
Just little acts of defiance, you know, whispering the truth.
Oh, wow.
Hiding people who were being targeted.
Right.
Refusing to participate in the Nazi stuff.
Yeah.
These things, maybe they seem insignificant, but
Yeah.
they show that people weren't just going along with it.
Right.
A glimmer of hope, you know, in a really dark time.
It's amazing, that desire for freedom,
It is.
for justice, to keep fighting, even when it seems impossible.
And there were larger groups, too.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, there was this group called the White Rose.
The White Rose.
They were students in Munich, incredibly brave.
What did they do?
They wrote leaflets denouncing the Nazis.
They wrote leaflets.
They did. Exposed the horrible things that were happening, called for people to resist peacefully.
To write and distribute leaflets under the Nazi regime. That's incredible.
They knew the risks. They knew they could be caught.
And were they?
They were, and they were executed.
Wow.
But what they did, it inspired others,
Yeah.
reminded the world that even in the darkest times, there's always someone willing to stand up for what's right.
Their story is so powerful. Shows that even the smallest act of resistance can make a difference.
It can. And resistance took many forms.
What do you mean?
You had religious groups speaking out,
Oh, wow.
labor organizations working in secret, even people within the government trying to sabotage things from the inside.
So that wasn't just like one group of people. It was everywhere.
It was. But it was dangerous. The Nazi regime, it was all about fear and control.
Right. The Gestapo, the SS, the concentration camps.
He used terror to keep people in line.
To silence anyone who disagreed.
Exactly. And as Hitler gained more power in Germany, he started looking outward.
Towards the rest of Europe.
He wanted to expand, to create this new German empire.
And that's where his book, Mein Kampf, comes in, right?
Exactly. He spelled out his whole ideology.
Racial superiority.
The need for what he called living space, Lebensraum.
For the German people.
He wasn't content with just Germany.
It's scary how ambitious he was.
It is. He started by taking over Austria,
1938.
and no one really stopped him.
Yeah.
Then he went after Czechoslovakia.
Emboldened.
Exactly. It showed that appeasement wouldn't work.
He just wanted more and more.
And then he invaded Poland.
1939, the start of World War II.
The world was still recovering from the First War, so they hesitated to challenge him. But his aggression, his complete disregard for any kind of international law, and his genocidal policies, they couldn't be ignored any longer.
Right.
The invasion of Poland forced countries to choose sides.
And it plunged the world into another horrific war.
So we've gone from the instability of the Weimar Republic to the rise of Hitler to the Nazis taking control, and then ultimately to World War II.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. What are some of the key takeaways here? What can we learn from this, especially today?
I think one of the biggest things is, well, how fragile democracy really is.
Yeah.
We can't just assume it'll always be there. We have to protect it.
We have to recognize the signs of extremism and fight to protect our freedoms.
You're absolutely right. And we have to be willing to speak out against injustice, to stand up for those who are being marginalized and persecuted.
Right. Silence when bad things are happening, it's like you're agreeing with it.
It is. We also have to understand how powerful propaganda can be.
Like how Hitler used it. Exactly. He controlled the story, he blamed minorities, and he made people afraid and angry.
It's a reminder that we need to think critically about the information we're given.
We need to question things.
Be wary of those who try to divide us.
Yes. And lastly, I think we have to remember the resilience of the human spirit.
Those who resisted, even when it was so dangerous.
They fought for what was right, never gave up hope. They showed us that even when things seem impossible, we can make a difference.
Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that, well, that the past isn't really over.
It isn't.
We have to learn from it.
We do.
And try to build a better future.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Hopefully, by understanding how something like this happened, we can stop it from happening again.
Thanks for listening, everyone.